the best way to do that, Alan, is just to tell you a little story, kind of my traveling down this technology road and how over the last century I've evolved to this model. Um, I'm one of 13 children, and my father was one of 18. I have 25 aunts and uncles, 150 plus first cousins.
Oh my goodness. I thought I had a lot with like 12, man. Go ahead.
And we were mostly military. I mean, until me, everybody was in the service, including my brothers, Marines in Vietnam. And so when I came along, I mean, I won't go into the detail, but I had no idea of going to college. But my mother was very religious. And I literally got a letter out of the, you might say, ether that invited me down to meet this guy that was the superintendent of Columbus, Ohio public schools. And he told me there were 4 individuals, don't know where they came from. I have an idea, maybe the environment that they must have been in, because I was only around money once, and that was in a Rotary Club dinner that had hosted my high school, Columbus East High School, when we had won the state championship, and they were trying to get my classmates to go to their various colleges, which was as illegal then as it is now. But anyway, that's so that was the only time I was around money. And without going into the detail, I kind of played along with that because I was the first boy academically in the school, and so I got to give the pledge of allegiance to the flag there. And then they had a dinner, and as they were running around talking to my various classmates, I was tall and looked like another one of the ball players, and so they were making the proposal to me, and I just kind of listened. You know, they was walking up and they would do their proposals, and I didn't say who I was. They were just making the proposal, and then when they would finish, I'd say, so they'd say, "What do you think? You want to go to my school?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I would like to go to college, but at the time I wasn't even thinking about college. So I was getting ready to go to the service with my other brother who was in the Air Force. But I thought, coming from where I'd come from, kind of in the streets, you learn to play along with the game. So I played the game, and I said, but I would like to go to college. and so that was it for that night. And then I got this letter out of ether. So I figure it came from there somewhere, and maybe they decided, that dude, he was playing us. Okay, we'll play him. So they said,
call your bluff.
Yeah, right. So the letter that was explained to me by the superintendent was, okay, you have to be in engineering, you have to go to one of these 3 schools, which was Ohio State, Ohio University, or Ohio Northern, which were 2 public universities and a private university like Oberlin. You have to maintain a 3-pointer every quarter. First quarter, you lose the 3-point. We take all the money. And you have to agree to never try to find out who we were. And so that was the proposal he gave me. So I'm sitting there, number one, kind of laughing. Number one, I didn't, that was the first time I've been in an office like it. So I didn't trust him to begin with. And so now he's giving me this proposal from these dudes that I don't know, who I really don't trust. So I'm trying to figure this whole thing is a setup. So I don't even tell my mother I go, because she's still 6 were off, 3 sisters, and my brother were in the military. And so I don't tell her for about 3 days. And then when I do tell her, she was very religious. So she starts thanking the Lord, and Lord has said, but one of my sons, I can do something except send sons to war and all this stuff. And I'm sitting there listening to her saying, Mom, you don't seem to understand. This guy said I had to go into engineering. I didn't really know what that was. I had to maintain a 3-point. And the high school I was coming from, I figured that was going to be pretty tough because I knew I had to have math. So I said, Mom, I just kind of told you about this. I didn't intend for you to take it seriously. And that was the beginning. without going into detail, there's a lot that she had to first cry me into the college to get me there, her and her friend. And then after I got into college, um, I wasn't very confident, but an amazing thing happened when the um, other colleagues, because I was the only black in that second black in 100 years, I think they told me. I was the second black in 100 years in that engineering college.
Oh my goodness.
And they kept asking me if I knew the other guy. And I said, well, despite what you guys think, we don't all know each other.
No.
I never heard of him. I knew he worked for GE. And so nobody would room with me then, right? This is in the 60s. I couldn't get anybody. This was during Martin Luther King. You know, I marched with King and the Kent State kids were shot. They surrounded our school. So we're talking about that time frame.
Okay.
And but the net is I got through that. I mean, through a lot of emotional stuff. Got a master's in engineering from Ohio State. And I was actually in the first Ohio State computer science class. Been on the board for about 40 years, and now we have 3,600 majors, support 25, 30,000 students. Spent 20 years in IBM developing DB2, HTML, the early stages of Watson, and ran their languages worldwide. So I'd say for every year of my life since I was 50, I've been either building a team or shipping a product from some company somewhere in the world. So that's kind of, I guess I became a technology nerd, and I like the risk. And everything they said I couldn't do, I did. I've been the only black VP of so many technology companies. I got used to walking in and taking over, and some employees saying, well, you got that job just because you were black. And I said, it's okay. If you don't do your job, you're going to be just as fired. So that usually put that to rest. And I'd say if any of the rest of you in here want to have that discussion with me in deeper levels, just call my admin and get on my schedule. And, because either you're on my development ship or you're off. But once we launch, I'll have no mutiny in the middle of the voyage.
That's right.
So anyway, that's what I've done for 40 or 50 years. And then over that time, obviously, I learned a lot about data and people and a concept called information. And I learned very early when I was at Ohio State as a consultant writing code for NIH, National Institute of Health. And they would ship at that time tapes called MEDLARs, medical library retrieval tapes. And they would send them out to colleges all over the United States. And the various researchers had no way of retrieving that data from the tapes. So I was one in Ohio State has thousands of majors there, right? 70,000 students now, 80,000 people. And so I would write code constantly for these professors in all these different areas wanted to do research using different languages. So one time I knew 15 different languages. Every language had its own structure going all the way down to a similar language. So I had to write the code to pull the data out and put it into the structure of that language, whether it was PL1 or COBOL or Semler or Pascal or Ada. There was just many of them then. And so I'm sitting there doing all this coding saying, this is kind of dumb. How come somebody just doesn't write a get data interface and all the rest of these languages come to this interface rather than me constantly doing all these little verticals? So I started writing my own get data stuff. And out of that, the concept of database and stuff like that started coming to me, but also the difference between information and data, that they were inversely proportional, that the more data that's created in the world, the harder it is to get information, because the only place information is valuable to the human, like when you do a search, what you're going out is to the web into petabytes of data, but you only want a little intersection that comes back that answers your question. And only the answer to that question is information. And it's inversely proportional. That is, the bigger this data pile gets, finding the data that's relevant to your question gets harder and harder to find, because new data is coming all the time that may be relevant to your question, which is changing all the time. Okay. And it gets almost impossible in today's world, with the data being created now by data bots, for humans to even attempt to keep up with it. So spending 20 years building tools within IBM, doing this more sophisticated, basically still get data. I mean, I manage teams for dictionaries and DB2 and databases and IMS and CICS and HTML. I mean, I manage new technology probably every, I'd say 12 to 15 months of my life. I was, putting out new tools, always hunting for this holy grail, creating logical models, trying to get people further and further away from the data to information. And so I finally got tired of that, and I left IBM. I said, I've done enough of this data running stuff. I'm going to go over here on the information side, since these humans, these customers, don't really realize they should be hunting for information and not data. I need to go over here and talk. So I quit IBM, and I said the best way to do that, from having worked with them, was to be a CIO. And I didn't want to report to the CEO because he got in the way, because he or she, they didn't know what information was either. And because I was going to be doing new stuff, I wanted to report to the money due position, which was a CFO. Mm-hmm. So even when I could report to the CEOs, I always reported to the CFOs. I mean, I had a weird career. People always thought I was crazy doing stuff, but that's because they didn't have my vision. I always had a vision, and I really wasn't working for them anyway. I was working for my vision. So I went wherever I needed to go to test another piece of my vision. Mm. And the money was enough, but I wasn't chasing the money. So over time, I built this 6-level view of the world that I thought I could map all human thinking into. And it started out as a low B, ladder of business intelligence, which is what I wrote a book about. Climbing the ladder of business intelligence, that you can Google. And it's me and a professor named Sam Gill, who was a chairman of a department at San Francisco State, and Natalie Zaytouni, who was one of my project managers. And because I was traveling all over the world, then I told her if she would help us manage and close this book down, I'd let her put her name on the book. And I told the professor, I said, since I've tried to write this a couple of times and I know too much about it, and I'm making it too technical, if you work with me and tell me which part of it would apply to students, and we'll pull it out, I'll let you put your name on the book. And I learned that from my father, which was, if you don't care who gets credit for something, you can do almost anything you want to do, son. He was an uneducated man, which is what put me on this lifetime voyage of the difference between education and wisdom. And so in this model, we go up, at the bottom, we have facts, which is what you measure the real world with. And that's expanding, right? Because things are expanding in the real world. And with the box, we can put these facts together any way we want and call it anything we want and put semantics around it. And humans with computers are creating these what they call facts. Some of them misfacts nowadays, lies. And so it's getting even worse. But anyway, the little minions are down there creating these mindful of facts and misfacts. And there's so much of it, you can't even retrieve it. Humans certainly can't retrieve it. And even automation folks can't retrieve it because they don't even know where it is. And then when they retrieve it, they put it in ways that's to their own vested interests. But let's call that the first level, facts. And then there's data. And data becomes facts that are retrievable in the time frame that the human wants to make a decision with. So the difference between facts and data is structured in a way that you can retrieve usually some subset of the facts and get it into a form where you can make a decision with it in a time frame. And then information is data that has semantics added to it so that it has meaning.
Right.
So humans really don't get value out of this whole world until they get to the information level. Now, in the past, the humans did all that themselves, even when they didn't know they were doing it. You know, a human would see a door even as a child, didn't know it was a door until the parent keeps saying, open the door, didn't you know? And finally, the human, like a little chat box, you know, see this thing so many times and hear this word door, semantics says, you know, as a little kid, that's the door. And when the human is born, right, this stuff is going together 4 billion neurons a day. I mean, it's fat when you're younger, the faster and faster this stuff is going together, and as you get to be older, it slows down, right? So this information level becomes the first level, and just think about that as when you do search and you come back and you get the answer, and you kind of with your common sense in the real world, if it's not what you want, you say, well, that's not what I want. So you change the content, which we call quick keyword and content. You change that argument and you search again. And you keep doing it until the answer comes back to what you think is reasonable. Okay. And you can do that as long as you're doing simple kinds of questions where you can kind of put it all in your mind and you know what you're looking for. But now if that becomes a very complex prompt, requests many different questions that has to be summed up, you no longer have the ability to verify what the bot brought back is accurate or not.
That's right.
And that's where we are with the chat box. Now, people call that new technology. It really wasn't new. We knew about it since 1990. We also knew the problems with it. Guy from Toronto, can't think of his name right now, but he was the one that kind of ran a test on it once in a presentation at a conference with images and recognized that the images was good. So if you look at these pattern recognition technologies, which is what the chat boxes are, they're going out and looking at billions of examples of stuff that seem the same, deterministic. And when you ask something and it goes out and does that and it sees it enough, it says every time that you ask that question, then this is what I'll go get. And so if you want a letter written, and I go out and I look at all the letters that have been written for insurance or whatever kind of things, and I can put that together. And that's why I'm training, you know, this deterministic engine. I can look at billions of those things. Problem is, I can put all of this stuff together, and some of it's good, and 60 or 70% of the stuff on the web is sex, right? So that's why I have to have humans in there to kick all that stuff out. That's why it costs me billions of dollars on using open AI and all these various engines. It costs billions of dollars to get them trained because the humans have to go in and sort out all the junk that they can't even begin to let come out on the web. Okay. And so if you're doing video, image, and text, the chats can do that because they're deterministic, that is probabilistic, looking at these repeated patterns. And if you're looking at an image, right, there's no real accuracy there. I can put pictures together, all kind of permutations, and I might come out with something that looks better, and I might like it and I might not like it, but there's not a real danger of anybody's life. Okay. I do the same thing with videos, but when I start playing around with text, I'll bring the structure back to you and it'll look perfect. But if I don't find what I want, I'll create some stuff on my own called hallucinations. And while it'll look perfect, if you don't have the ability to go through it, you'll never know that it's a lie. Okay. And the only chance that you'll have of trying to figure out the lies from the other lies now is what I'm saying. You have to have the bots fighting the bots. So now you have to get a set of bots that'll read the what's coming back from the lion bots, and that's what's going on right now. These billions of dollars is bots fighting bots, and people playing around with text. And in Gardner Group, they call this the hype cycle, but half of this stuff is junk.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Now
Now,
it makes sense.
over here on our side, if you look at AI, we started out with symbolic AI back in the day, and even when I was in IBM, and that's even basically what Watson is, where we built symbols, that is, formulas, logic. And so, I would write code in the early days where I could simulate the way the Supreme Court made decisions. And I wrote, I don't know, probably hundreds of algorithms for different researchers where I would be trying to simulate the real world. But I was really simulating it and I could test it. I mean, one of my jobs was to write code that would recognize healthy hearts from diseased hearts in the early 70s because there were so many people that had heart problems. And in those days, the nurses had to go around to the various rooms keeping track, and it was cost prohibitive. So I worked with 5 cardiologists at Ohio State and created software that would recognize healthy hearts, diseased hearts, and so forth. Right now, I knew nothing about hearts. So the cardiologist had to tell me, what a heartbeat was, and then I plotted them. I mean, like when you go get an EKG, there's QRS and T complexes. All those various little curves are given names. They have different complexes. There's different heights. Healthy hearts have that one big amplitude. It's a certain, and so I wrote first mathematics. Since my undergraduate degree was mechanical engineering and math, I created this beautiful mathematical model of hearts that at that time the computers weren't powerful enough to handle. And so it took me months to do that before I realized that was the wrong way to go. So I created a series, what I would call conditions that I'll add up everything in a heartbeat. I'll add up the height, the amplitude of the sine waves, and all these different curves. I'll add them all up and represent them in numbers with averages, because the amplitude was only so high, the width only so wide, and I would test that against, you might say, this numerical semantical representation of a healthy heart. And then I would run against the diseased hearts, and I'd see what the standard deviations were for all of those different curves. And I learned over time, comparing all these heartbeats, that they all had a different set of standard deviations, variables, derivatives, and mathematics, right? Derivatives, just like when you're taking calculus. And so I was determining the derivatives of all the various different types of hearts, right? Now, this was all symbolic, but if something went wrong, I was simulating the real world mathematically, but I could back up. And if the doctors asked me, what went wrong with that heart, I can back up and tell them exactly what went wrong. Versus that chat box, which is just doing it by patterns. They can't go back and tell you anything because they don't even know how they got there themselves. Even the bot doesn't know, because it's just all statistical pattern recognition. That's a big difference between probabilistic and deterministic, or symbolic, versus the probabilistic. And so we're in this world then that we're building, in the symbolic world, that says we'll always know where we're coming from. We're simulating the world, and there's a lot of real world phenomena that you can do this way. And if you need accuracy, it's the only AI way to go. Theoretically, you will never get there with the chat box approach. And that's what's going to happen in the next couple of years. Now, a lot of people don't know that, so they may misuse it and have liability. I mean, there's a lot of liability insurance. There's going to be a lot of people pay $millions.
You've heard it already. The lawyers that have used ChatGPT in a miscited case law, right?
Yes, so. Yes. And that's going to continue until people understand this. Now, I mean, I got 50 years of understanding this, so it's pretty obvious to me. But for the average youngsters coming in, people like yourself, right? who jump around on this train, figuring that the chat's just the beginning of AI. AI started in 1948.
But the younger generations love to think that we're the start of everything, right? Jim, this one I'm gonna stop recording. This was an incredible treat. Just sharing your perspective.
Yeah.
I
By the way,
will
Just
let
one
me
thing.
let me finish the. So
Continue recording, Alan.
yeah,
Huh?
we went to
Continue recording.
information, and then the next level is knowledge, which will be our next step once we do our first release. Knowledge is going to be what I call verified information. So in this new world, it becomes very important because that's where we will handle the misinformation.
That's
And
right.
so at level 4, we will have the knowledge units, and that's going to be critical because we will also have the ability at level 5, which is understanding now, to treat our reasoning engines, to start actually doing strategic questions and projections based on real world models. And then finally, level 6, which I call enabled intuition, or I used to call my wisdom level, is where we will then be able to get rid of false paths. We can tell you, we can't tell you the answer, but we can tell you the probability of going left is a lot less successful than going right. And that's why I call it enabled intuition. And there's more details, but those are the 6 levels of the world.
I love this framework of thinking. Like, I could dive deep in so many areas. Like, 30 minutes isn't nearly enough time. And so, Jim, I was wondering if I would love more time with you if you'd be open to it. I would love that opportunity to just sit down with you and hear more about the way you see the world, as well as your experience as a Black tech executive. Is that something you'd be open to?
Yeah, where are we going with it? I mean,
so I think the goal for me, I'm right now in the process of raising a venture capital fund, but I don't have a ton of money to deploy. I'm looking for my first deal. Quorio is definitely looking like it's it. But one of the things that I have been doing is I've been wanting to tell stories of Black Silicon Valley executives and get them on record, right? For folks that just haven't heard them before, because this is my first time not only hearing about kind of like the origins of some of these technologies, but the amount of like work and thought that you guys have put into building the world that we live in today. And I think that a lot of young entrepreneurs, certainly young Black entrepreneurs, would get a lot of value at hearing not only about your experiences coming up through Silicon Valley, but how you've developed this framework of thinking that is enabling an incredible future. Because what Quorio represents, right, from the enterprise intelligence standpoint, is one that I think you're unlocking. You're really unlocking what folks consider like the sci-fi, the enablement of the recall, right, of perfect information. And that to me is incredibly exciting. How you got here is like a story that I think is also worth being told. And I would love to tell it in conjunction with some other Black tech executives. And so it's not just your story, but other folks who have also, built incredible solutions. And so if that's something you'd be open to, it would just, we could work out the details. But I would love to have the opportunity to tell your story.
yeah, let's meet and see where we go. I could probably tell you about other Black executives here in the Valley because as usual, we're all over, right? It's like Morgan, the guy that did the the real McCoy for the brakes on the railroads to the traffic lights was done, so yeah, we're hidden as everything in his story that was told by him. We were all hidden.
That's right. And so I would love the opportunity to bring that story to the forefront. There are a lot of founders, not just Black founders, but all founders, I think, could get a lot of value out of your stories. I really do.
Yeah, they certainly have gotten a lot of money out of them.
Indeed. Jim, thank you very much for the time. And KG, I really do appreciate you setting this up. Let me follow up with an email in terms of like sometimes we can get together, as well as an agenda for the discussion, just so you have some greater context in terms of the vision here. But this was an incredible treat, and I I was already a believer in Choreo, but like now I think I have I'm beginning to understand the future that you guys are trying to build, and it's one that I definitely want to be a part of. So I really appreciate it, KG and Jim. Thank you very much for the time.
You're welcome.